questions. We had a lot of questions before we left yesterday, and I know there are questions out there that didn't get asked. So as we get going in the second day of the debate, please make sure that you have your questions out there and questions available. I just want to remind you all, the debate today or yesterday, and we're going to finish up today, is school choice. Will school choice improve U.S. education? The team we have here today that was arguing for school choice or vouchers or whatever you want to call it, but it is school choice, is Ms. VanDeVelde, Mr. Stinson. Give them a round of applause. Thank you. And the team arguing against school choice in U.S. education is Ms. O'Reilly and Mr. Norway. Okay, this portion of the debate, we're going to take approximately or up to 20 minutes to continue the questions from the audience. Whether they're questions from you out there in the audience, where we have some from our Twitter sphere questions. Does anybody have a question for either team, for or against? Yes, sir, Mr. Grant, go ahead.
From how I understood the voucher system, they give you a lump sum so you can afford most, if not all, schools. Not all schools cost that. So my question is, say you choose like a cheaper school or a school that doesn't use up all the money on the voucher, what would happen to the leftover money?
Well, the easy answer to that is that, and this is what a lot of states that have done school choice have used with that, any leftovers you have from the voucher goes into what they call an education savings account. So it's just like a regular savings account, but it's for leftover voucher money. And what you do with that is any money that's left by the time you graduate from high school, you get to use towards a college tuition. So you take that leftover money that you get from the voucher, if there is leftover money, and it goes into an account that you can access then after you graduate.
No, you can respond. Go ahead.
I just want to be really clear about the money situation. There was a lot of debate yesterday about what was cheaper. I want to be very clear that voucher is a more expensive system for you. You're going to be, all of you, will be paying taxes very soon if you don't already. And a lot of you will be paying property taxes in the next 10 years if you buy a home. There is no way that your property taxes will stay the same or at a lower level under a voucher system. And let me give you an example from the city of Milwaukee and the city of Cleveland. Actually, vouchers, to be honest, undermine libertarian choice ideas. What happens when you do that is, vouchers do become cheaper. Voucher schools, charter schools become cheaper because they compete. But the thing is, our schools, our public schools like Galva are still there. You're still in the classroom, and some teachers are still in those buildings. And they have to be funded at the same rate they were already being funded at. The problem is, when you push money to a voucher school or a charter school, you're still having to fund public education. What happened in Milwaukee and Cleveland was, they opened up many charter schools, of which didn't perform any better than the public. And then what occurred is, the city of Milwaukee and Cleveland said that they would need to raise property taxes because they couldn't make up the money that was being used for the vouchers to still pay for the public schools, where the money should be going in the first place. I don't know if any of you have seen a property tax check. They're really expensive, especially in nicer towns. And depending on the home and the size of the lot you own, you're going to be paying a lot. If you choose the voucher system, your property taxes will go up tremendously, which is anti-libertarian, number one, and it's anti-choice. I don't think the voters chose to have their property tax raised in this theory of how charters work. It's extremely expensive. Extremely. Ask Milwaukee, who just banned charter school expansion January of this year.
I just have to respond to that for a second. First of all, I want to really try to keep politics out of this, but I do want to address the idea that vouchers are more expensive. And the first thing I want to say is that Milwaukee is not a school choice system. Milwaukee is primarily a charter school system. And part of the idea of a choice system is that schools that do not do well, this is public and non-public schools, lose funding. And I agree with you that a voucher system that did not allow for competition would be more expensive. There is no doubt that that would be true. But under a school choice system, we do not continue to fund schools that are failing. That is the whole purpose for having a school choice system. So to say that a voucher system or a school choice system would increase the cost of schooling is a complete fallacy. And Milwaukee just doesn't, Milwaukee and Cleveland don't work as examples of that because they are not school choice systems. They're charter school systems. So I agree charter school systems by themselves would raise the cost, but school choice is not a charter school system. It's competition between all.
I don't think we can avoid the politics of the situation, but if you want me to go non-political, I can turn around this way and give you another example. Ronald Reagan was quoted as saying, "We establish no religion in this country, we command no worship, we mandate no belief, nor will we ever. Church and state are and must remain separate. All are free to believe or not believe. We are all free to practice a faith or not, and those who believe are free and should be free to speak of and act on their belief." Voucher money, taxpayer money, can go towards choice schools. A choice school could be Peoria Notre Dame. It could be any Catholic, any Lutheran, any Methodist, whatever institution. It can go to that. It undermines free choice when taxpayers are forced to subsidize or to pay for students' education at a private school that mandates a certain religious teaching. I, as a taxpayer, have no problem with free choice in religion. I have a problem, and I think you would too, funding someone to go to a private institution. Frankly, it's unconstitutional. If you look down at the core argument of constitutional law, using taxpayer money to fund private institutions like Peoria Notre Dame is unconstitutional. It goes against the whole concept of church and state. And I think at the core of the thing here, we have to debate, again, is the alternative right or wrong? It's unconstitutional, and a lot of people are beginning to smell that argument and file lawsuits against it. It's a slippery slope. Milwaukee and Cleveland do offer choice schools. They do have a heavily chartered system, like Mr. Stinson said, but they still have systems where that money could be going to choice schools.
Actually, constitutionally, the Supreme Court has ruled that Zellman versus Simons-Harris, that vouchers for religious schools were okay so long as they passed the 5-part test. The program must have a valid security purpose. Aid must go to the parents and not schools. A broad class of beneficiaries must be covered. The program must be neutral with religion, and there must be adequate non-religious options.
There's in the last couple of years, and Mr. Norway is exactly right. This was, and I was surprised that they didn't raise this argument yesterday, because this is usually one of the most popular arguments against choice, is that how could we morally ask somebody who is not a Christian to pay for somebody to go to a Christian school, right? That just sounds crazy, and I don't think anybody in here would agree with that. And so what the Supreme Court has done is they've looked at cases involving exactly this matter, and they've said that school choice, and they've ruled in at least 3 different cases that school choice does not violate the First Amendment of our United States Constitution. But they put a 5-part, a really strict test on that to decide whether or not choice did that. And if you pass this 5-part test right here, then it is not unconstitutional to have a choice program. And if we're still concerned about it, I would like to remind you guys that the voucher system, the school choice system, is adaptable. If you would like, if that would be something we could compromise on, I would be willing to say that vouchers could not be used in religious schools whatsoever. I would be willing to take that if that meant that we could have choice in all other areas.
Are we suggesting in the school of choice, are we suggesting that this is a federal program, this is a federally mandated program, or do states have the ability to decide?
It would be a state's decision.
State system, not federally mandated, okay. Any questions from the audience? Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
So many of the schools that are being referred to as failing schools are schools that serve poor urban students. Is it not possible that it is not the schools that are failing these students, but rather a culture of poverty and violence? And if schools are put into a situation where students have choice, would not talented teachers be deterred from working in those areas where those students can be best served because they know test scores are not going to be as high because of the community you're serving?
And to go from my perspective real quick, data indicates that the turnover rate is substantially higher in charter schools versus public schools at the moment. A lot of that has to do with pay. But to answer your question about discouraging teachers from working in particular schools, a lot of the best minds in education, teachers that is, are leaving those districts because they know that they're being set up for failure. And I think that even in a small town, we focus a lot on urban areas. I want to go back to Galva because you're the ones voting. Okay, it's about you. You have seen probably a percentage rate turnover in this district is very high. I'd like you to think about the coaches and the teachers in this district since you've been here and how many changes we've seen. A lot of that is because they are looking and seeking to go to institutions that, number one, probably pay more as a self-absorption kind of issue. But number two, they are looking to go in districts that are going to solidly stay at the testing rate that is required of them. Yes, good teachers are being pushed away from public schools because of the culture, because of the tests and the requirements put on them, and the state isn't supporting you, number one. They're not giving you guys your money, and as a result, this choice system is being created to supposedly fix that problem. You're not the problem. You're not the problem. The funding and the culture around public education is the problem. I was asked yesterday by Kat, how do we fix that? I cannot stress to you enough that funding is the issue. 90% of American kids go to public schools. Let's start funding 90% of kids instead of focusing on how to deal with 10%. Let's fund all students, and especially 90% that are in public education, instead of splitting the funds between two systems. It does not make any sense.
I would just like to say that first of all, I want to ask where did you get the numbers yesterday from when you said that private schools cost $6,000 and public schools cost $11,000?
I didn't say public, I said charter, because private is they can charge more because they can recruit and stuff, and that's completely different. They're way more expensive. The charter schools that get the vouchers, I got that from, I don't know where that paper is. Forbes.com, I think.
Well, from past years here, not recently, because we've been underfunded a lot lately. If you talk to people who've been here like 20, 30 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, there were a lot more classes here. And yesterday you made the point of how there were separations between intelligence in students and that they get weighed down by slower students. We used to have more funding and we would have separate classes with like more advanced classes or just a lot more classes in general. And if we were funded like we should be, we would be getting those classes back and there wouldn't really be a need for choice in general for different schools.
I want to respond really quick and try to make this as quickly as possible. There was, I think, 3 different issues that were raised, so let me separate the issues first and address each one. First one, Mrs. Rayleigh's concern about poverty. I do agree with you. I think nobody here can ignore that poverty plays a huge role, no matter what your politics are, on education. However, I also don't think we can underestimate or underlook at the idea that poor and failing schools play into poverty. Bad schools produce poverty. So I think we need to look again at what these current systems do and again, I'm not talking about Galva, I'm talking about urban centers and how that plays into poverty and the low skills that are out of there. To Mr. Norway's point about the fix to the current system is funding, and I want to say that this is not something that hasn't been tried. And in fact, we have increased funding exponentially since the 1970s, even before Reagan was president. And what we've seen is no measurable performance gains or achievement gains after increasing that funding. Okay, so I don't buy the argument that funding is going to fix a system that is structurally flawed. And then finally, to Curran's point, I think another good one, since it's personal here at Galva, that we haven't received the adequate funding we should. And I know that's frustrating for teachers, students, administrators, parents, everybody in the community. But I would like to remind you that because Galva is a great school, in a choice system, we would be rewarded with extra funding, more funding for those opportunities. Just go.
Alright, here's a Twitter question, and it's what happens when a child doesn't like the choice that they've made since they made it when they were so young, and like what incentive do they have to work then?
Like the choice of their school?
Yes, I think that's the same. You said, "Say, I made the choice and I wanted to go there, and then I don't like that school. What do I do now?"
It's just like being in a college. Like, if you go into a major in college that you don't like, you finish out the semester in the classes, or you can drop the classes if it's early enough, and you can finish your gen eds, or you can just try a different major. It's the same thing as college.
Sure, go ahead.
There's something that Stinson said earlier about how, like, the voucher, if you didn't use all the money, it would go into a savings account that you could use to pay off your tuition for college. Wouldn't it be ideal for students that don't have a lot of money to go to the cheapest school possible, because public, like, schooling when you're in high school is free, but it's not in college, so you would try to go to the cheapest school to rack up the most money you could to spend it on a good college? So wouldn't it, like, influence people to go to bad ones that are way cheaper than to go to, like, the good ones that they can use all their money on? Then
So you're saying, you're speaking economically here, I love it. You're saying that the incentive structure here was going to give people the incentive to go to cheap schools, so they've got that extra money, right, saved up to go to college. But you also know in economics there's something called opportunity cost. When you make a decision, you lose the ability to do something else. So if they choose that poorer school, okay, then they also give up the opportunity to have higher performance and higher achievement in that other school. So I would say still, even if it's a choice that you don't agree with, I think it's a choice that the parents and the kids should have.
To go off your point, actually, and I spoke to a colleague of mine intimately about this last night for an extended period of time, and there was a theory put out yesterday that for poor students who cannot, so to speak, make up the gap, the cost of the charter or private school, whatever they're trying to go towards, that there's this magical, mythical book bag where money is deposited into it. It's simply, I don't know where they're getting it. And I would like to ask, and hopefully respond, where you account for that gap, that poor families, suddenly magic money appears and it meets the cost of a good charter school. I repeat, good charter school. It's the same theory. For the poorest kid in the world, the fact is, they could be the most intelligent kid and they could be Harvard material. Doesn't mean they can afford Harvard. They can't. It's that simple. Same thing with the charters. You can be the brightest young mind who is supposedly trapped in a poor public institution, and if you want to go to a better charter school or choice school, where is the money coming from to make up for that? Indeed, actually, you are pushing kids who are already economically behind further behind by asking them to front money for a school that really doesn't even perform better. Going back to Milwaukee, looking at a study from the Milwaukee Journal, they came out and said English learning, EOL students who struggle in English, and also students with special needs, there are twice as many in public schools as there are in charter schools or choice schools, yet more than half of those independent charter schools are not meeting performance expectations. So, going back to Milwaukee again and pushing it aside, even if you don't want to call them a choice institution, those charter schools, they're failing. They're failing students. Until we see the data that they are indeed the better choice for you, I think it's dangerous to pull your money away to fund kids somewhere else.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes left to open for questions. Yes, ma'am.
I just had a question about what you do with, okay, an example, and this wasn't a charter school, this was a magnet school, but I think the charter schools could work the same way. This was in Salt Lake City that has a pretty huge district. They had a magnet school where they pulled the top 10 to 20% out of all of the schools, high schools, and put them in one school so that they could have extra high achieving sort of classes. And then everybody started comparing all the other schools to this great performing school because it had all of the top kids. And when they would go to competitions, academic competitions, nobody could beat them because the top 20% of the entire city was there. And I can see that happening with the charter schools or the private schools, the choice schools, because if you get one that really stands out as far as being high performing, then you end up with everybody wants to go with that, which can lower the quality of the students left. And I'm not saying that everybody has to be a scholar. You can still have high performing students or schools with all levels of students. But when you start comparing, well, this is the one I want to go to, this is the one because they've got all the best schools, they got all the best teachers and students and everything else. And how do you work with that and try and get people to realize that even though there's a school that's performing higher, it could be the caliber of the students that are there. And it becomes a slippery slope to try and say, well, you know, all of our special ed kids are over here and all of our top. But to me, that kind of looks into tracking students into schools, which isn't allowed in schools themselves, but you know, within a school, so why should it be allowed within the choice system?
Okay, I think that's one of probably the single biggest misconception about choice is that, you know, if we allow kids to go to pay more money to go to better schools, then we're hurting the other kids. But I want to take that logic, that very logic, and I want to apply it to the Harvard example that we gave here. I want to ask you, does a rich kid going to Harvard take away your ability to learn? Does that sound logical? Right? If, in other words, if a child can afford a better school, does that necessarily mean that somebody at Blackhawk is not going to learn? Or somebody at Monmouth College or the University of Illinois is not going to learn? So I don't think we can I don't think we can say that just by kids going to better schools means that other kids are going to be worse for it. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not, if one wins, that doesn't mean the other has to lose. And I think we can look at our universities as a clear indication that that's not the case.
No, but when public looks at that and compares, well, look at what they do compared to what this one does, when you average all of the scores from the different schools, the public's perception of that, and I'm not saying you can't learn at any school. A lot of the learning truly has to be up to the students because the teachers are there, you know, providing it, and the kids have to step up and take that in themselves.
Okay, I'm gonna allow them to respond because we're gonna end the question and answer with his response, and we'll go ahead and go to the closing statement so you can prepare for that. So go ahead.
Just in a quick response, kind of to the whole concept of public perception. One of the most misunderstood institutions is education. Very few people know about it except for the kids who are in the room and the folks who are staff and members of the district themselves. Mr. Stinson had mentioned that funding has not shown any measurable progress within public education as funding has gone up, which hasn't happened recently, but in past decades when it's gone up it hasn't helped. I think we also have to understand that that man on the wall over there in the middle, Mr. Friedman, along with people like Mr. Reagan, or President Reagan, they also began instituting the standardized testing system in force in the 1980s. So as funding was up, so was suddenly a mass amount of new testing. So it was easily possible to say I'm supporting education, I'm funding it more, but also I'm going to institute new standards, new tests, new expectations for kids, and then when those kids don't meet them because they're new and they're fresh, I now have a reason to pull back public funding because kids can't meet the standards that we put in place with the money. So they gave the golden tickets out, the mythical golden tickets of cash, but they tied stuff to it. They tied it to testing and rigor that a lot of students weren't ready to meet, and as a result pulled funding away. The tests stayed, but the funding sure didn't. And as a result, schools stay lower and lower and lower in scoring, and the funding keeps getting lower and lower and lower. And we see that at Galva. That's why you guys went from 77% in math, around 76, 77 in reading and English, down to the mid-50s. You didn't get less intelligent, guys. Let's be frank. You got less support.
All right, thank you. Okay, that's going to conclude our question and answer portion.